Texas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and the vigorous back and forth regarding Breonna Taylor. First of all, I do appreciate you being here and your answering of the questions. You know, I do want to make sure that before we go down this road, I clarify some things that were different in the Breonna Taylor case. Number one, the officers were considered to have botched what took place on that day because they fired blindly into a home, meaning that they initiated some sort of deadly force, and the only information that they had was allegedly that this was the place of some sort of drug activity. At that point in time, you ended up having her boyfriend, who returned fire, believing that someone was breaking in. It is very different when you are returning fire versus initiating fire, and there was no need to do so. In addition to that, no-knock warrants and knock warrants are basically a couple of seconds of difference, if I'm going to be honest. But one of the things that I worked on in the state legislature was actually making sure that we could reform no-knock warrants because it is a risk not only to the people in the homes, especially in a state like Texas, where everyone is allowed to have a gun, but it's also a huge risk to law enforcement. So being able to do this effectively, this is dangerous work that law enforcement engage in every single day. And I do want to be clear that I am always sorry for the loss of life. I don't care about the race. I don't care about any of those things. And honestly, I believe in the criminal justice system. I believe that if someone is accused of something, they should have their day in court. So I do want to say that I take issue with anyone losing their life, period, even if it's somebody that's accused of a crime. And I believe that they should go through due process and have an opportunity. But in this particular set of circumstances, we know that if somebody shoots at me, in fact, some would argue that last week I had a colleague that decided she wanted to shoot at me, I'm going to shoot back. And that's what happened here. But what's more frustrating for me in this hearing, and what seems to be a pattern, is that we continue to attempt to litigate pending cases. We saw that we had one of the witnesses in the Trump trial. He came and testified before us last week, and then he went and testified this week in front of the judiciary, and then we know that this is still a pending case, and I do want to afford an opportunity for those that will be granted access to discovery, video, whatever video doesn't exist, as well as any statements, depositions, all those things. Some folk that have access to all the information, and ultimately, if this needs to go to court, having a jury that will make a decision based upon the facts and the evidence. So with that, I want to make sure that we move on to something else, which is the reality that, in fact, let me do this before I run out of time. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 97% annual gun owner October 2023 report, which details these and other statistics pertaining to gun owners' views on common sense gun control policies, and I'm gonna go back up to what those views are. Thank you so much. 97%, a bipartisan group of gun owners and non-gun owners, which conducts research on gun safety policies, found that with regard to common sense gun policies, 86% of gun owners, well over the simple majority, support keeping guns out of the hands of violent criminals. 70% of gun owners said they wish we would enact some kind of gun reform. 66% of gun owners, for instance, think guns should be restricted on school grounds, and 67% think that they should be restricted in government buildings. And I will tell you that I fall into those categories because I am a licensed gun owner. Yet despite the majority of Americans and the majority of gun owners, Republicans last week passed a bill out of the House that eliminates states' ability to regulate firearms on private property, government buildings, playgrounds, and gun-free school zones. If that's not hypocrisy, I honestly don't know what it is, and it doesn't end there. As a party self-proclaiming itself as law enforcement's biggest advocate and supporter, Republicans on this very committee have introduced legislation to abolish the law enforcement agency entirely. Ms. Sampson, I have a few yes or no questions. I may only get to one. Yes or no, are you familiar with the role of ATF?
Yes.
And to your understanding, the ATF is in fact law enforcement, correct?
Yes.
Does ATF's duties include preventing incidents, investigating cases, and recommending prosecution for issues of violent crimes and weapons for gangs and career criminals,
Yes.
narcotic traffickers,
Yes.
domestic and international arms traffickers,
Yes.
armed human traffickers,
Yes.
terrorists.
Yes.
And with that, I will yield.
Yeah. Brian Malinowski was none of those. The gentlelady yields